Imagine this, Hong Kong after midnight. The harbor is a black mirror, and the office towers along it glow like empty lanterns, their lights winking out one by one as the city finally exhales. The streets never fully sleep here, but the energy changes. The noise drops. The crowds thin. What's left are cleaners, security guards, delivery drivers, and a handful of stubborn night owls trying to squeeze a few more hours out of the day. Beneath it all, far below the neon and billboards, the tunnels of the MTR stretch under the city like veins. In the daytime, they're full of life. Trains roar through them every couple of minutes, packed shoulder to shoulder with office workers, students, and tourists. But after the last scheduled service, those same tunnels become something else entirely. Empty, echoing, and if you believe some people, not really empty at all. This story was shared by a Hong Kong man who used to work in logistics. Let's call him Raymond. At the time, he was in his mid-20s, just starting a new job in Kwun Tong. It wasn't glamorous work, endless inventory sheets, phone calls with clients in different time zones, chasing delays and missing pallets. But the pay was decent, and he wanted to prove himself. The catch was the hours. Because they serviced customers all over Asia, their busy period usually started right when most other people were already thinking about going home. Raymond lived with his parents in the New Territories, right at the far end of a long MTR line. His commute ran past industrial blocks, old housing estates, and then out toward the hills. On a good night, from Kwun Tong back to his home station took almost an hour. On a bad night, if he missed a connection or a train was delayed, it could stretch much longer. He kept telling himself it was temporary. 3 months, he thought. 3 months of this, and my boss will see I can handle late shifts. Then I can ask for better hours. So he pushed through night after night, half asleep on the train, his mind jumping between spreadsheets and fantasies of promotion. Most nights followed the same rhythm. He'd leave the office a little before 11, grab a microwave dinner from a convenience store, and hurry down into the station. He learned the timetable by instinct. If he made a certain train at a certain minute, he could still catch the last interchange and avoid an expensive taxi ride. After a while, the whole route felt like muscle memory. Turnstile, escalator, platform, train, transfer, final ride home through the sleeping city. But one Tuesday night, that rhythm broke. Just as he was packing up, the warehouse system crashed. Orders disappeared from the screen, quantities scrambled. His supervisor's face went pale, then tight with stress, and he and another colleague were ordered to stay behind and double-check everything manually. By the time they finished re-entering the data, the digital clock above the exit glowed 12:10 a.m. in harsh red digits. Raymond felt his stomach drop. His colleague lived close enough to walk. Raymond didn't have that luxury. He slung his bag over his shoulder and ran. The streets in the industrial area were almost empty. Just a few trucks parked along the curb and the distant clatter of someone closing a metal gate. The air was thick and humid, sticking to his skin. He spotted the station entrance ahead, its big MTR logo glowing like a tiny beacon, and sprinted harder, his breath burning in his chest. One set of glass doors had its metal shutter already rolled halfway down. Another remained open, guarded by a single, bored-looking staff member in a reflective vest, clearly waiting for the last stragglers so he could lock up and go home. Raymond rushed past him with a breathless nod, tapped his octopus card, and practically flew down the escalator, the rubber handrail slick under his palm. The station concourse below was eerily quiet. Only a handful of light boxes were still on. Most of the shops were shuttered, their metal grates pulled down like closed eyes. The usual daytime swell of voices had shrunk to nothing. His footsteps echoed off the tiles as he hurried toward his platform, every slap of his shoes sounding too loud in the emptiness. He expected to see at least a few people waiting, cleaners with mops, security guards getting off shift, a student scrolling on their phone. Even at this hour, Hong Kong usually has someone somewhere still awake. But when he stepped onto the platform, he realized he was completely alone. There was no one sitting on the metal benches, no one standing near the edge, no one pacing up and down the length of the platform. The small kiosk at the far end had its steel shutter rolled down tight. The only signs of life were the glowing overhead monitors and the strip lights humming softly along the ceiling. A faint draft slid out from the tunnel, cool and slightly damp, carrying with it a thin metallic smell, like old rails and dust that hadn't been disturbed for a very long time. He glanced up at the sign. It showed his line, his direction, and a countdown, 1 minute. Lucky, he muttered to himself, trying to slow his breathing. If I'd taken another 5 minutes upstairs, I'd be walking home. He checked his phone. The time matched the display. No new messages from his parents, no missed calls. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and walked a little way down the platform, pretending he didn't feel that tiny prickle at the back of his neck, the one that comes when you're alone in a big empty space and your brain insists there should be someone else there. The tunnel mouth ahead of him yawned like a perfect black circle. For a long stretch of seconds, nothing moved. Then the rails beneath his feet began to vibrate, just slightly at first, like a distant heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside the darkness, a low rumble rolled closer. A pale light appeared around the curve, small as a coin at first, then growing until it became a solid white beam cutting through the tunnel. The train emerged from the darkness. At a glance, it was just another MTR train, white body, colored stripe, twin headlights glaring a little too brightly for a station this empty. But as it drew closer, Raymond's relief slowly twisted into confusion. The bright headlights washed over the platform, but the carriages behind them looked wrong. The interior lights were on, but they were shockingly dim, casting a yellowish, tired glow instead of the usual harsh white. Normally, the cars looked almost clinical inside, bright and clean, every surface visible. This train looked like it belonged in an old photograph, faded, uneven, as if the light itself was struggling to stay alive. Raymond frowned. Maybe they were testing an older model. Maybe they'd turned down the intensity to save power before shutting the line for the night. It was late. He was exhausted. There had to be a simple explanation. The train slid into the station much more slowly than usual, brakes squealing louder than he remembered. As it finally came to a stop, he noticed something else. From where he stood, he couldn't see a single silhouette through the windows. No shadows of passengers shifting in their seats, no hint of movement at all. From the platform side, every carriage looked almost empty. He swallowed, suddenly aware of how dry his mouth was. "Come on," he told himself quietly. "It's the last train. Of course it's empty." The doors in front of him opened with a soft hiss. No announcement played at first. Normally there was a bright, cheerful chime and a familiar recorded voice. "Please stand back from the doors." Tonight, the speakers stayed silent for a heartbeat too long. Then they crackled to life in a burst of harsh static, the sound sharp and jagged enough to make him flinch and raise his shoulders. It cut off as abruptly as it began, leaving the air feeling even heavier than before. Raymond hesitated only a second. Missing this train meant a long, expensive taxi ride, maybe even being stranded halfway home. Whatever minor technical glitch the system was having, he told himself he could endure it for 1 more hour. He stepped across the gap into the nearest carriage. The change in atmosphere hit him immediately. The air inside the train felt different from the platform, stale and slightly sour, as if it hadn't been properly ventilated in a long time. The faint smell of metal and dust was stronger here, sitting at the back of his throat. The dim yellowish lights hummed overhead, some of them flickering every few seconds like dying insects trapped in glass tubes. And the interior didn't match any of the trains he was used to riding. The walls and seats had that older, boxier design he'd only seen in old photos or grainy news clips. More metal, fewer smooth plastic panels, duller colors, old-style grab rails with chipped paint. It looked like a first-generation model dragged out of retirement. For a second, he wondered if he'd accidentally stepped onto some kind of maintenance train or staff service. But then he looked around. The carriage was empty. Completely, utterly empty. He glanced toward the connecting door at the far end of the carriage. Through the narrow window, he could just make out the next car. That one looked empty too. No movement, no shapes, no reflections of other passengers. The only thing he saw was his own faint outline, stretched and distorted by the glass like a shadow that didn't quite belong to him. "Well," he whispered, forcing a tiny laugh, "at least I'll get a seat." He sat down near the middle of the car, close enough to the doors that he wouldn't have to walk far when he reached his stop, but not right by the edge. Old habit. On a normal night, he would have taken out his phone, checked social media, answered a few messages. Tonight, though, the silence pressed against him, and for some reason he didn't feel like breaking it with music or a video. The doors slid shut behind him. Again, instead of the usual calm, automated voice, the speakers spat another burst of broken, angry static that scraped along his nerves. Then, mercifully, the noise cut off, and the train began to move. As the station lights fell away outside the window, the interior of the carriage seemed to grow even dimmer. Raymond leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes for a moment, telling himself he'd just rest them until the next major stop. The gentle rocking of the train usually lulled him towards sleep, and tonight was no exception. His muscles finally began to relax, shoulders dropping, breathing slowing. But somewhere beneath the rhythm of wheels on rails, another sound crept in, so faint at first that he thought he imagined it. A dull, irregular thump. At first, Raymond tried to ignore the sound. Trains make all kinds of noises, metal groaning, wheels squealing, loose panels rattling. He told himself it was just that, a loose part, a stray bottle someone had left rolling around. Nothing unusual. But the more he listened, the less mechanical it felt. Thump. Pause. Thump. Thump. It wasn't rhythmic like the clack of wheels. It wasn't steady like a knock from the joints. It came in bursts, uneven, like something soft but heavy hitting the floor at irregular intervals. Almost like footsteps that didn't know how to be footsteps. He opened his eyes. The carriage still looked empty at first glance. The same worn metal, the same yellowish lights, the same rows of vacant seats. No one sat across from him. No one stood gripping the handrails. The windows on the opposite side showed only the blur of tunnel walls rushing past. Yet the sound kept going. Closer now. Thump, thump, thump. His gaze drifted down. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, just beyond the row of poles, something small and dark moved along the floor in the aisle. His heart lurched. Then he realized it was only a crumpled plastic bag, dragged by the subtle rush of air as the train sped forward. It skittered along the aisle, bumped gently against one of the door frames, and stopped. Silence. Raymond let out a slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He almost laughed at himself. "You're being ridiculous," he thought. "You're tired, that's all." The train rattled on. He leaned back again and shut his eyes, deciding that if he focused on the sound of the tracks, he might calm down. It was working, slowly, when the air in the carriage shifted. It wasn't a temperature change, not exactly. More like the atmosphere thickened. The stale, sour smell he'd noticed earlier deepened, mixing with something faintly sweet and oddly familiar, like incense smoke that had clung to clothing for too long. The hairs on his arms rose. Then the thump came again, right in front of him. He opened his eyes. Someone was sitting on the seat directly across the aisle. His first thought was simple. When did she get here? He hadn't felt the train slow, hadn't heard the doors open. There was no announcement of a station, no cheerful chime. Yet there she was, as if she'd been there the whole time, and he just hadn't noticed. It was a young woman, maybe around his age, perhaps a little younger. Her long hair was pulled back into a low ponytail. She wore a pale blouse, a dark knee-length skirt, and flat shoes that looked slightly scuffed. At her feet rested a bright red umbrella, the tip pressed to the floor between her toes. Her clothes weren't especially old-fashioned, but they weren't trendy either, like something from 10 or 15 years ago. A style that used to be everywhere but quietly slipped out of fashion, lingering only in old photos and memories. She was staring straight ahead, not at him, not at anything he could see. Her posture was too straight, too stiff, as if she'd been sitting up like that for a very long time. Her hands rested neatly on top of the umbrella's curved handle, fingers pale and slender, knuckles just a bit too sharp. The thump he'd been hearing came from the umbrella tip hitting the floor. Now, as he watched, she lifted it a few centimeters, held it suspended in the air, then let it drop. Thump. The sound was louder than it should have been, considering how lightly it seemed to fall. It rang through the empty carriage, echoing in a way that made his teeth itch. Raymond swallowed. He forced his gaze up to her face, thinking he should at least nod, or look away, or do something normal. Her expression, though, stopped him cold. Her face was calm. Too calm. Eyes slightly lowered, mouth relaxed, no twitch of annoyance or boredom. There was nothing obviously wrong if you looked quickly, but the longer he stared, the more his stomach twisted. Her skin was the color of someone who had been inside all day under fluorescent lights, pale with a faint gray tint, like there was no warmth beneath it at all. The corners of her eyes looked a little too dark, like deep bruises that had settled and never faded. And she wasn't blinking. Not hardly ever blinking. Not blinking very slowly. She simply did not blink. He tore his gaze away and fixed it on the advertisements above her head instead. Most of the ads above her head were for brands Raymond recognized, but something about them was off. Phone plans promising 3G everywhere, bubble tea chains with old logos, furniture stores using clunky fonts he hadn't seen since secondary school. It felt like a snapshot of Hong Kong from another time, frozen and glued inside this carriage. The umbrella lifted again. Thump. The sound punched straight into his chest. He flinched, then forced himself to sit still. Maybe she was just nervous. People fidget on trains all the time, he told himself. That was normal. What wasn't normal was how she did it, without her shoulders shifting, without her back relaxing even once. She still hadn't blinked. Realizing he'd been staring too long, he dropped his gaze to his hands, clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The floor between them was scuffed, stained in faint darker patches that his mind immediately tried to label as spilled drinks, oil, anything but what it really suggested. The umbrella tip slid a little closer to his shoes. He hadn't seen her move, but it was closer. Just a few centimeters, enough to make his skin crawl. He looked up again. She was still sitting perfectly straight, eyes lowered, fingers resting lightly on the handle. Only the angle of her wrists had changed. "Excuse me," he said before he could stop himself. His voice sounded too loud in the empty carriage. She didn't react. Not a twitch, not a flicker, as if she hadn't heard him at all. "Are you all right?" he tried. Silence. The train felt slower now, like it was pushing through thick liquid. There should have been another major station by this point. He knew this line. He knew these gaps. But the carriage just kept rolling through the dark. No change in speed, no familiar chime. "How long have we been between stations?" he thought. The umbrella tip scraped forward another inch. Thump. The lights overhead flickered violently, plunging them into near darkness for a heartbeat before stuttering back to their weak yellow glow. For that instant, her face was nothing but a pale oval in the dark, eyes like two holes punched into paper. The train finally began to slow. The vibration under his feet changed pitch. Somewhere ahead, speakers crackled with static, but no station name followed. Tunnel walls gave way to the outline of a platform, dim, underlit, tiles stained and old. No adverts. No route maps. No commuters. No one at all. Raymond's blood ran cold. He knew every station on this line. This wasn't one of them. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. No cheerful jingle, no polite recorded voice. Just the dry sigh of air escaping between train and platform. He stared out, brain scrambling to explain what he was seeing. A maintenance stop. A closed station. Some place he'd never noticed. A part of him whispered, "Get off. Whatever this is, get off now." Another replied, "And walk into that? Into nowhere?" He turned back to the girl. Her head had turned too, slowly, smoothly, to face him. The rest of her body hadn't moved. Only her neck had rotated, like a joint that hadn't been oiled in years. Her eyes met his, and up close he saw just how black they were. Not dark brown. Black. The kind that swallowed light. Her lips parted. Dry, grayish skin stretched over them. "You can get off," she said. The voice sounded thin and far away, like an old announcement replayed on broken speakers. There was no warmth in it. No concern. Just a flat curiosity. He glanced back at the platform. The dim lamps, the stained tiles, the absolute absence of anything human. "This isn't my station," he managed. I don't recognize it." Her head tilted, a small jerk to one side, almost childlike. "You're sure?" she asked. The doors had been open too long. On a normal night, they would have closed already. Now they simply stayed there, yawning onto the empty platform, as if the entire train system were waiting for his answer. Every instinct in his body screamed that if he stepped off here, he wouldn't find exits or staff. He'd find more silence, more tunnels, more of whatever she was. "I'll stay," he whispered. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the corners of her mouth lifted just slightly. It wasn't a real smile, more like the idea of one, drawn onto her face by someone who'd never seen one in person. The umbrella tip dropped, thump. The doors snapped shut instantly. The train shuddered and pulled away, leaving the nameless platform behind. As it slipped back into the tunnel, the station lights dimmed even further, until they were swallowed by darkness. Raymond gripped the edge of his seat. He told himself it was over. He'd stay on until he saw a station he knew, then get off, find staff, call his parents. One day he'd laugh about this. He tried not to look at her. The carriage rattled on. The dark outside the windows felt thicker than before, pressing right against the glass. He counted in his head the way he always did between familiar stops. 30 seconds. A minute. 90 seconds. It felt like they were going on forever. A soft tapping cut through his thoughts. Not the heavy thump of the umbrella this time. A light, precise sound. It was coming from his left. Slowly he turned. The girl with the red umbrella was no longer across the aisle. She was sitting right next to him. He hadn't heard footsteps. Hadn't felt the seat shift. One moment the space had been empty. The next, she was there, folded neatly into the corner, umbrella between her knees. Up close, the faint scent of incense and damp concrete clung to her like a second skin. Strands of her hair looked wet now, clumping together, tiny droplets trembling at the ends without ever falling. Her eyes turned toward him. "Did you get lost?" she asked. The voice was closer, but still had that doubled echo to it, like another voice was repeating the same words half a beat behind. "I think there's a problem with this train," Raymond forced out. "I don't recognize that station we stopped at." "That station isn't for you," she said. "You're not supposed to get off there." His throat went dry. "Then where is it for?" She looked past him, out into the dim carriage. "There are trains for you," she said. "For people who are still here." Her gaze flicked briefly down to his chest, as if listening to his heartbeat. "And there are trains for them." She nodded, just once, toward the rest of the car. Raymond followed her eyes, and his stomach lurched. The seats that had been empty were filled. Men in outdated office shirts and wide ties. Women in old-style blouses. Teenagers in school uniforms from designs he hadn't seen in years. An elderly man with a paper shopping bag, so faded the logo was almost gone. Their clothes didn't match a single era. Some looked like they were from the 80s, some from the early 2000s, some older still. Their skin had the same faint gray tint. Their eyes were downcast, unfocused, as if watching scenes only they could see. None of them moved. None of them looked at him. "How long have they been sitting there?" he thought. "Were they always here?" "You're not supposed to see this," the girl said gently. "But sometimes people rush. They run to catch the last train. They come down when the station is already closing, and they don't notice which one they step onto." Her fingers tightened around the umbrella handle. "This line doesn't end where yours does." The train began to slow again. This time Raymond didn't hesitate. He stood up so quickly the blood rushed to his head. He fixed his gaze on the doors, not daring to look at the faces around him. Outside, bright station lights came into view, clean, white, familiar. Advertisements, route maps, people, real people. He didn't check the station name. The moment the doors opened, he stepped out, forcing himself to walk, not run, his entire body screaming to sprint. He crossed the yellow line, took 3 steps onto the platform, and only then turned around. Through the windows he saw them. The pale passengers. the bowed heads, the old clothes. Still, none of them looked at him. Except her. The girl with the red umbrella was standing by the door now, one hand on the glass, umbrella hanging loosely at her side. Her eyes never left his. For a heartbeat, he thought she might step out, follow him. Instead, she raised her free hand and gave a small, precise wave. The doors closed. As the train started to move, every other passenger in the carriage turned their head in a single, perfectly synchronized motion. Dozens of hollow eyes locked onto him through the glass. And then all together, they raised their hands and waved as well, slow, deliberate motions like a farewell they'd performed many times before. Raymond's knees almost buckled. He watched until the train disappeared into the tunnel and the red taillights faded into black. Only when the rails stopped trembling did he realize how hard his own hands were shaking. He didn't wait for another train. He took the escalator up 2 steps at a time, burst through the gates, and stumbled out into the night air. The station name above the exit was exactly what he expected, his usual interchange. Somehow, after everything, the train had still delivered him where he needed to be. That night, he took a taxi home. After that, no matter how late work ran, he never again sprinted for a nearly empty last train with dying yellow lights. Because now he understood. Most trains in Hong Kong are for the living. Some quietly are not.